Hey everyone, I'm SuperFizz from the EthStaker community, and I'm really excited today to be with some folks from the Rocketpool community. And today we're going to do a kind of a security walkthrough with Mentor. Before we get too far into this, I'd like to introduce everyone. And even before that, I want to give you a brief idea about why EthStaker is so excited to have Rocketpool content on our channel. Because we don't host content from any service on our channel, but Rocketpool is very different for us. Rocketpool is a trustless, open source, and decentralized provider for Ethereum stakers with less than 32 Ether. This is a service that we have been looking and hoping for actually years now, even before the Beacon Chain launch. And so in our minds, in my mind, Rocketpool is in a different category or a different league than other providers. So as we go forward, you're going to find that I openly support and promote Rocketpool as an alternative to solo staking. I'm always going to say that solo staking is the top tier in staking, the gold standard, but Rocketpool is in my mind, the only acceptable alternative right now. With all of that said, I want to urge caution because Rocketpool is still pre-launch. When it does launch on mainnet, there is the potential of a smart contract vulnerability, a zero-day exploit, or any number of things that might go wrong. So as you hear my excitement, I hope that you temper that with the need for caution and slow entry. So I think everything is going to go fine. But it's very important to me that we support the community and we say, hey, look, this has the potential to be awesome, but you need to be careful about jumping in too quickly until the product has had a chance to be tested or trialed by fire on mainnet. So with that, I'm glad to have some friends here. Let me introduce some people. Our presenter today is going to be Mentor.
Nice to see everyone.
We're joined by Yorick Down.
Hello.
And JCRTP, Joe Clappis from Rocketpool.
Hi, guys.
Buddha as an EthStaker.
Hi, everyone.
Our incredible engineer, also serving roles with Gitcoin and Reality Cards, is Michael.
Hello.
I'm going to start calling you the... Oh, do you remember He-Man? There was the guy of like the man of many faces. I don't. Okay, maybe I'm dating myself. I'm gonna have to get that guy. And a couple special guests from trading. Jasper the Ghost. Hey there.
Hello, hello.
And maybe most exciting to some of our viewers is going to be Thomas G.
Hey, guys.
Thomas G is probably best known as the New Whale. He has made a deep commitment to Rocketpool, and a lot of people in the community are looking forward to learning a little more about him. So, hey, do you know what, guys? I lost the agenda, and so I'm suddenly like, what am I doing next? Give me a sec to pull it up. Am I scrolling back up on this thing? Got it. Why are we here? Who are our special guests? And the Rocketpool launch date. Rocketpool is currently in a beta on Tldr, but if you haven't run that beta, I definitely encourage you to. I'm running the beta on Tldr, but what we're really looking forward to is mainnet launch on October 6th. The 1.0 smart node operator software is available. So if you're ready to get set up as a smart node operator, you can go ahead and download that 1.0 client and get synced up to mainnet. That's for people who have 16 Ether and 1.6 Rocketpool denominated in Ether. I don't mean to be too confusing there. So as we hop in, I think one of the things people are most interested in, Thomas, if you don't mind me putting you on the stage really quickly, welcome. People are curious. what brings you? What got you into Rocketpool?
Well, I've been following it for a while, and I've got a bunch of ETH and would love to earn some yield on it, and was planning on solo staking, and I've really just been holding off till Rocketpool, to be honest. And I kind of did a deep dive on the tokenomics right before I started buying, and really saw the potential on that side of it. But really just excited about the decentralization that it will bring to Ethereum staking.
Great. And as a community representative, I'd like to thank you for actually coming to join us and shoot the bull with us. I know that it's exciting for a lot of the daily group to see you drop in and just shoot the bull. So
yeah, I'm
thanks for
happy to
hanging
be
out.
here. It's fun to meme around in trading, but you know, at the heart of it, this is a really powerful project for Ethereum, and I'm excited to be a node operator.
If I might just
Great.
build off Biz's question there, what impact did the trading or the Discord in general have on your decision to ape in as hard as you did? I'm just curious if that was a factor.
It was a factor. Like, you know, I'm not a meme trader, obviously, but you know, just the community rallying around it, and you know, it seemed like a very genuine community that's excited about building stuff for Ethereum.
It was the POAPs. You could just say that.
Oh yeah, it was the POAPs.
Yeah, it's hilarious to me, the depth of integration between POAP and Rocketpool. Like it seems to be the fuel for the Rocketpool trading channel.
That was maybe the biggest surprise when I jumped into all that, is suddenly all these POAPs keep getting minted, and like some of them are about me, and it's just like, oh my god, this is nuts.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Jasper is a well-regarded member of the Rocketpool trading community. I don't know, he might be in other Rocketpool channels. I've never been outside of trading, so I don't really know. So we're glad to have you here. Anything you'd like to bring up?
The only thing I would have to say is a Squish Taco made a nice Twitter thread last night that everyone should check out. Squish Chaos on Twitter.
Okay, and I'd like to speak to management because I haven't seen a POAP claim for that yet, and it is a grave concern for me.
I'll speak to my fellows in the DGen Discord channel and see what I can get done.
I mean, honestly, it's been over 20 minutes. What's taking so long, guys?
I know. And so we are an open forum. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the YouTube view along or in Rocketpool Trading. We'll be glad to pass those right to Mentor. The reason that we can't have 80 people in here is because it makes it more difficult to focus on the agenda. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mentor, let him get started. What we're looking for are implementing security best practices in the Rocketpool smart node setup. And this is based on a guide that was developed by JCRTP, and it is applied by Mentor, and he'll walk you through all of those steps. We also know from a lot of experience that York is an extremely intelligent operator and may have some value to add. Why? Don't raise your eyebrows. You know this is true. Okay.
If I can point out one thing, I'll say that the securing your node guide is actually Mentor's baby. He has pretty much been working on this from scratch since the beginning. So one of the nice advents of being an open source project like this is we tend to attract a lot of very experienced people from a pretty diverse set of industries, Mentor being one such individual. And so we have a lot of people outside of the Rocketpool developers actually contributing to this and making it stronger and helping harden. And so all of the security stuff you're going to see, all of this came from Mentor. I just kind of formatted it to make it look pretty on the website.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I am all about giving due credit. And Mentor, I apologize for not being aware of that. So
How dare you?
Even better that you're sharing it with us. I know, how dare me. All right,
And
Mentor, you were up.
I'll add to that. I'll take it from here, and I'll add that if there's anyone watching, listening that does have expertise, like Joe said, the Rocketpool team is very receptive to pull requests for everything. So if you think you can contribute, definitely go to to the GitHub and see if there's something something interesting you can do, because the team's only so big and there's a lot of stuff that nice to have stuff that we could do. Untitled, I think you were going to share the presentation, right?
Yep, I've got the
Right.
first slide right now.
Terrific. So thank you everyone for coming to this securing your Rocketpool staking node session. The things we're covering today are geared towards Rocketpool, but are likely to also carry over to some solo staking operations. I'll make a comment here and there about solo staking, but we're going to focus on the Rocketpool aspect. Next slide, please. So if you have any questions, the call etiquette is post them wherever anyone's watching. So we have the YouTube chat, and I think the trading Discord channel is watched mostly. If there's anything that's very relevant at the moment, one of the guys in the call will just stop me. If you have a question, feel free to ask. You don't need to wait till the end. So that, you know, if you miss something, maybe all the dominoes after make no sense to you. So feel free to ask. Next slide, please. So a small disclaimer, everything we're covering today are intended as best practice starting points. There is a lot to security and some of it has great nuance to it. However, I'm confident that in the sense of an 80-20 analysis, we're going to be covering the 20% of stuff that's going to get you 80% to being there. Next slide, please. So my name is Mentor. If you want to find me anywhere, I am actually Mentor on GitHub and Twitter, and I am at Mentor #numbers on the Rocketpool Discord. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about security or anything else after the session. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to be doing in the coming 40 to 60 minutes, depending on how many questions we have, is cover the basic attack surfaces that you need to worry about as a node operator. And then thinking about how to defend your client machine, what that exactly is, we'll cover in a minute. And then how to secure your actual node, so the machine that's going to be running your validator or validators. Next slide, please. The security model that I'm going to be using today is one that starts with you. You're a happy dolphin, you have 16 ETH or more, you're going to want to stake. You are going to be interfacing with your client machine. In my case, I'm using a little MacBook right now. Your client machine, in this case, the MacBook, can be connected to the internet or to your local network. And through that, you're going to be connecting to your validator, your node. You might not fit in this model per se. Maybe you have a physical machine that you're plugging into with a keyboard and so on. We're going to be using these assumptions today. If you want more details on different setups, the Rocketpool docs are a great place to read more about them. Next slide, please. So the first attack surface that you need to worry about as a node operator doesn't start with your node, but starts with you and your client device. So if your client device is compromised, either it is stolen, it is infected with some sort of keylogger, snooper, ransomware virus, anything you do on a client device is not going to be secure. And then it doesn't matter how secure your node is, it matters a little, but it's going to be severely undermined if your client device is hacked. So if you, for example, set up a new node and your client device has a snooper where they can see your mnemonic phrase, and then all bets are off. So what we want to start with is that first surface. Next slide, please. It can be summarized as be boring and keep your machine up to date. So what you want to avoid at all times is that your client machine gets compromised, and compromises happen when you do things that are unpredictable or unverified. So for example, if you download a cracked or pirated piece of software, these are notorious for having been tampered with. So, you know, if you want to save some money by being a pirate and you install a game, a piece of software, Office Suite, whatever, you can no longer guarantee that your client machine is secure. So the details of this, you can read a little bit more in the documentation, but the summary, be boring on your client machine and keep it patched at all times. So whenever security updates come out for a system, there will be an update regardless of whether you're on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And it is your job to make sure that you're patched as soon as possible. You would, by the way, be surprised by the amount of machines in the world that run old and ancient operating systems that are surprisingly exploitable. I'm looking particularly at the security lines at airports, for example. Next slide, please. So when it comes to keeping a secure client machine, you may just want to consider keeping a separate device as your crypto client. So you are going to be investing 16 to 32 ETH or more in the Fizz, you're unmuted. You might want to consider just buying a separate laptop to do your crypto stuff on. You're going to be investing a significant amount of money in staking. So spending a couple $100 or euros on a relatively cheap laptop that needs to do nothing but run a terminal might make great security sense. So definitely consider that. Next slide, please. If you are not going to be using a unique device solely for this, one thing to always pay attention to, and many of you watching will feel like we're repeating obvious truths, but always make sure that in any situation where you have a login, you're using unique passphrases. Prefer phrases over passwords. The length of a password is usually more important than the complexity to the human eye. And wherever possible, enable two-factor authentication. When you do so, the order of awesomeness: step 1, text messages, beats nothing, but not really great. Step 2, your authenticator apps, something like Google Authenticator, Authy, or if you're on Android, and OTP is really nice. And ideally, you're using something like a hardware YubiKey or an alternative. Next slide, please. So the next attack surface, once you've taken care of your interaction between you and your machine, is between your machine and the internet. And the internet in this case might be your local network if you are at home and accessing a machine that's on your local network. The things I worry most about are other compromised machines on the network and exploits that might require local network access. So a couple of you that might be paying attention to the security world may remember that one of the biggest DDoS attacks in history was done by exploiting a large number of IoT devices, smart lights, thermostats, and so on. These were compromised, and because most people leave universal plug and play open on their routers, these opened up routers across the world, and these devices were then used to carry out a number of DDoS attacks. This is something that, from a security perspective, keeps me up at night most. So whenever you are going to be connecting to any network, next slide, please, use preferably only trusted networks. Under no circumstance are you to take your dedicated secure client and go sit at a Starbucks and do your stuff from there. Granted, we are going to be using encrypted connection methods, so hypothetically the risk is not very high, but a public network is akin to a public restroom. You're going to assume it's dirty, and there's all sorts of stuff there that you don't want to think about. So yeah, don't take your staking business onto a network you don't trust. Next slide, please. The final attack surface in the series is the one we're going to be spending the most time on today. Is your actual node machine. So presumably you either have a piece of hardware at home or a piece of hardware running in the cloud that is running your validators. The lowest hanging fruit from a security perspective are protecting yourself from SSH brute forcing and from known exploits that might be in your system or software running on your system. So what we're going to be doing today, next slide please, is focus on setting up SSH keys. So we're not using username and password authentication to our node because inherently that comes with a security risk. We're going to be setting up a basic firewall, and we're going to be enabling auto updates, specifically security patches, and not so much any sort of optional updates. As a bonus, we're going to be covering fail to ban, which is a protection from someone trying to brute force your system or repeatedly connect for whatever reason. Next slide, please. One specific Rocketpool mechanic that is very nice from a security perspective is the withdrawal address functionality. When you're setting up your Rocketpool node, the command line will prompt you to set a withdrawal address. In essence, what this does is this tells the Rocketpool stack that if your principal or your rewards are to be withdrawn at any point, then this can only be done to a certain address, presumably your cold wallet. This protects you from someone physically gaining access to your node, perhaps getting access to your private keys and being able to just run away with your money. They might do all sorts of bad things like trigger slashable offenses, but at the very least, the incentive to come after your node is a lot lower if the withdrawal can only go to your own withdrawal address. So be sure to not skip this during setup. Next slide, please. So that was a lot of information thrown at you in a small amount of time. Little TLDR before we get into the command line and get our fingers dirty. If you remember nothing else, remember these 3 things. So first, when it comes to your client machine, be boring, on the verge of paranoid. Don't do anything that under any circumstance might infect your machine with anything. Be the digital equivalent of a clean freak. Always install security updates immediately. Updates are good, keep them coming. And lastly, use trusted devices and trusted networks exclusively. All right, next slide, please. So then we come to the live demo program where we're gonna actually do stuff. And what we're gonna do is I'm gonna set up a clean VPS node. I'm gonna be sharing my screen in a second. I'm gonna be using DigitalOcean, though all the concepts carry over to other VPS providers that are popular in the staking community, like for example, Netcup. Next slide, please.
Can I make a quick comment?
Of course.
Okay, so using trusted networks is good advice. If you want to take it one further and be even more paranoid, you can adopt a zero trust networking mindset, which means you assume your network has been compromised, that some machine on there, if you have children, it will be your children's machine, is running malware. Believe me, I tried securing it and I couldn't, right? Like it took 2 weeks. Something has been compromised on your network, and you need to be okay with the security of your machine to exist in that environment. Assume it's a sewer, and am I still good? Of course, if you cannot compute in a sewer, that's better.
Yeah, but presumably 2021, everything's a sewer. So yeah, that's indeed a very good addition. Though I am not the strongest local networking person, but I know of people who have set up like multiple internet connections to their house and done all sorts of pretty things with subnetworks and so on.
Yeah, you can do VLANs. That'll work. That's fairly simple and a quick way to secure that. Like in my case, I have a guest VLAN. That's where I put everything, and then I have an IoT VLAN, and then I have a more trusted VLAN. So that's a simple thing to set up. It's not expensive. Anything that's a little better than whatever router you get from Comcast can do that. And so you have multiple SSIDs with multiple VLANs, and so I'm assuming all my IoT stuff is compromised. I'm assuming all my guest network is compromised.
Some of that, when we get to VLAN, when we get to segregated networks, kind of exceeds the scope of
it does.
what I'm looking for, like a very simple, straightforward. So I would, those are advanced security concepts, and I'm hoping we're going to focus on what I think happens is when noobs hear, not noobs, that's not fair. When regular home users hear advanced security concepts, they begin to believe that they're not able to secure their hardware. But in reality, anyone can secure their hardware following the easy guide. So
thanks for bringing us back. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. If you have been down the rabbit hole, you like going down the rabbit hole. So it's good that you know it. So forget everything that we talked about and just remember the 3 things that were on the previous slide. Be boring on the verge of paranoid in your client machine. Keep everything patched with updates immediately, and use trusted devices and trusted networks, and you can go down the rabbit hole. That's great. But yeah, try and not to get deer in the headlights syndrome if you hear us going down one of said rabbit holes. And Vedek, I think we're on the assumption slide, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So the assumption.
Oh, did we lose him?
And no, this is known. Mentor is on a 4G connection right now, so I feel confident he will pop right in. He also has a Wi-Fi backup,
Okay.
so it's a little glitchier. If someone else can go ahead and pick up where he's at, either York or Joe, that would be very helpful while he reestablishes connection.
I don't know that the slides have been shared with me.
So Michael has the slides. And again, I assume that Mentor will be right back. You know what we'll do? Let's give him just a few minutes to connect, and we will.
Actually, you know what I'll do? Let's do this.
Hey,
so for
it.
today's, oh, do we? Okay, never mind.
Yes,
I'll do that
back.
later.
Great.
It's back. All set.
Oh, you guys are almost going to get the POAP. Hey, and Mentor, what I can tell you, you might just turn off your video. That might give you more bandwidth to keep your connection and your audio.
All right, how are we doing?
Good.
That's great.
We got you
We
back.
got you.
Yep.
There we go. All right. So apologies to anyone watching or listening. I am traveling and on a bad Airbnb Wi-Fi. And I believe my internet provider has broken my hotspot.
Look, trading was convinced that you did this so as to not dox yourself. Just call it a security measure.
It's a security measure, yes. Of course, obviously. I have my Discord here, by the way, guys, on my right. If my stream stops for whatever reason and I can't tell, just message me in our little chat. Alrighty. So yeah, we're on the assumption slide, and the assumptions today are that we are working with a Mac or Linux client. So I am on a Mac device today. And that your server is going to be running on Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. When you're selecting your remote version of Ubuntu, keep in mind to try to always choose LTS versions. LTS stands for long-term support, and it means you can rely on a relatively long support for security updates for said system. So 20 is not the most recent Ubuntu, 21 is more recent. But LTS tends to come with more long-term guarantees. Next slide, please. One note for the Windows users who feel left out at this point. The terminal that we are going to be using can be replicated on Windows by either using git bash or cygwin, which is a program you can install, which gives you a Linux-like terminal on Windows. There is also recently in the Windows 10 system, the Windows Linux subsystem, the WLS. I have personally not used it, but I have heard great things from other people, so definitely consider that. All right, next slide, and that's the last slide. So we're going to go get up. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll get started. There we go. Alrighty. And can I get a little nodding if everyone can see my screen? Well?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. All right, so what we see here is the VPS panel of DigitalOcean. Again, this will work on any sort of infrastructure. I'm just going to create a new server here with an IP and username you guys will know in the stream, but not a password. So please also don't try to mess with me while doing this. I know there's always some benevolent trolls paying attention. We're just going to go with the cheapest VPS possible for now, because we're not going to be actually running anything on this. In reality, of course, you're going to have to select hardware that is commensurate with what you need for staking. I'm going to be choosing their Amsterdam data center because that is closest to where I am currently. And one note, so in here you see a reference to SSH keys. If you already know what this is and what it does, you'll know that this is the best option. However, for demo purposes, I'm going to be using a password authentication because on many systems, both the ones that you will run locally on your own network and many VPS providers, you will start with a password. So I'm going to type a password and not tell you what it is. And that will be the password. This, by the way, is not a good password. This is too short. You should always be using a passphrase. For demo purposes now, I am giving a terrible example. Giving it a host name, and we are going to create said droplet. Droplet being the terminology DigitalOcean uses for their servers. While that is setting up, which should take about a minute, I'm going to be using the Rocketpool documentation, and we're going to be running through the most important aspects. So if you're watching this, don't worry about typing along. You can do exactly what I'm going to be doing. And while we're taking the steps, I'm going to be giving some context, explaining what things are, what they do, and what you might want to pay extra special attention to.
Mentor, one quick note. You're using the concept of a passphrase a few times now, and I'm not sure that everybody watching knows what that is. Do you want to briefly talk to that? Or do you want me to? Yeah, okay. So
yeah, go ahead.
A simple way to do a passphrase rather than a password is you just use a number of words that create a story in your mind and you string them together. A very well-known one, and don't use this one, is correct horse battery staple, right? So it is impossible to crack. It is really easy to remember. And again, obviously not that one because it's public. Joe?
Don't do it, York. Don't do it, man. No. Well, now
yeah, so that's a passphrase.
I have to link the source. I'm going to go into the trade and channel.
That's a passphrase, right? So there's an old one I use that I no longer use. So I don't have a problem with sharing it. And I think it was dog fence big escape, because my dog did that a lot. And so it can be something that makes sense to you and you will not forget, but is impossible to crack. And that's really, really useful for like Bitwarden or something like that, or an SSH as your passphrase. That's it.
I will caveat that with I know you mean this, but for the people listening, you don't mean that this is your one passphrase for everything. It is one passphrase you might use for something very important, like your password manager.
Right. So typically what I do is I have a password manager minus Bitwarden, and I have a passphrase that secures the password manager with a 2FA on top of that. And then everything else is long, randomly generated passwords that I cannot and will not remember.
Yeah.
Plus 2FA,
as you can see, I'm also a big Bitwarden fan. Yep. So if anyone's looking, I highly recommend. All right. Well, that gave us enough time for the VPS, the virtual private server, to set up. So what we have here is the IP of the server that I'm going to be using for the demo. The default username is always root, and I will show you what happens when we try to log into this through SSH. So this is using SSH on the command line to say, I want to connect to this IP using this username root. First time it asks me whether the fingerprint of set server is correct. Generally, most people don't worry about this. The thing you got to worry about is if for some reason at a later point, the server or SSH gives you the notification that the fingerprint changed, which might imply something like a man-in-the-middle attack. All right, as you can see, the first thing that happens now is it asks for my password, which is the one I chose previously. Oh, don't tell me I made a typo. Gorgeous, I made a typo. We're going to create a new server. Outside of virtual private servers is that they're very fast to spin up.
While he's doing this, I want to take this opportunity to point out that using VPSs to host your your smart node does work, it's probably not best practice because we're looking to decentralize the network. And if a lot of people use VPS, for example, DigitalOcean, and it goes down, then rather than taking one node down, it's going to take a portion of the network down. So this is great for example. And if it's the best, if it's the most centralized way that you can stake, it's fine. But I would always encourage you to stake in the most decentralized way that you can. That often means running hardware at home.
Yeah, I will add to that that if you cannot run hardware at home for whatever reason, you might consider using a local data center, especially if you're, well, presumably it's the same in the US, but at least in Europe, there's a lot of smaller providers that provide excellent data centers. And then at the very least, will we avoid a situation where everyone is staking on AWS or something like it?
And I always want to avoid this idea of don't do something. Like, I'm not saying don't use DigitalOcean. My suggestion is always do the best thing that you can. So that's just a rule of thumb.
There we go. All right, mini heart attack. All right, so for the people who are still looking at my screen, we're now logged into the VPS through SSH with the default credentials.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah. So these are the credentials that I created when creating the CPS. If you are installing locally, for example, on a Raspberry Pi or whatever, you can look up the default passwords of your distribution in their documentation. Common are root or root Tor and that kind of thing. Usually it'll ask you to change the set password the first time you log in. The full documentation. So this is split into things that are essential and that are nice to have. So the first thing you'll see here is a note that refers to this open source guide, which is made for the paranoid. In keeping with what Fizz said earlier, if this is your first time or you are only moderately comfortable with the command line, just don't click it and don't look at it. If you are a paranoid who really likes the idea of securing things down to the last nail, have a look at it and have fun. So this is what we covered previously about keeping your client machine secure, your client machine being what we connect from. And the first thing that's going to be the most important in keeping with 80/20, if you're going to do nothing else, this is a good place to start. What you saw just now was me logging in through SSH with a username and password combination. The downside of username and password combination is that they can be susceptible to brute force attacks because a password is relatively short and usually has relatively low entropy. So if anything is going to be hacked, it is definitely, when it comes to SSH, the brute forcing of passwords. So what we're going to do instead is use something called SSH keys. You can think of SSH keys as something similar to your private and public keys in the crypto world. The private key, also in the sense of SSH, will give you access to things, whereas the public key is used more as an identification. A better metaphor with SSH keys is your public key serves as a lock you can put on a server, where your private key can function as the key that can open servers on which you have put said lock. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be generating a private key and a public key, so a key and a lock, and then we're going to put the lock on the remote server. So the first thing what we want to do is generate some keys. So we can copy this first command here, which is the key generation command. This will work on any terminal, and though keep in mind this is done on the client machine. So don't do this on your node, do this on your local machine, in my case, the MacBook. So the email address that's attached to this is more for your own identification. It doesn't actually do anything, not in our context anyway. So feel free to put something there that matters to you or doesn't. What you're going to see first here is the command line will be telling you that we're going to be generating a public-private key, and then it's going to ask you where you want to save said key. The convention is to do this in your home folder in a folder called .ssh. That's what you're seeing here. So in Mac, the user folder is always /users/your username, which in my case is mentor. In your case, it might be something different. It's probably something different. If you want to keep the key name the same, so in this case, the ID_ed followed by a number of numbers, you could do that. However, one might recommend to name the key something that matters or reminds you of what it is. I'm going to do everything visually here. You could do this with your keyboard shortcuts as well. But in essence, you just paste the path and you name it something that is more memorable to you. I'm going to be calling this one Rocketpool demo. And when I press enter, a whole bunch of stuff is going to happen. First, it's going to ask me for a passphrase. This is the passphrase with which the private key will be encrypted, similarly to what you might do in a crypto wallet. You might be familiar with the stories of Bitcoin wallets of people who have forgotten their passwords. And there's actually, for the enterprising among you, great bounties if you're able to hack said passwords. This should clue you in that there is no forgot password button for this passphrase. So it is very important for you to set this passphrase, and it is equally important that you do not forget it. A very important operational note, I'm going to be typing a password here. You might hear me type, and you'll see that there's no visual feedback. This is normal. There you go. It asked me to type the same password again. There we go. I made a typo here for the people who are paying attention. So we're going to do this again the exact same way without the typo. All right, and then we suddenly get a whole lot of feedback in our terminal. This line here is the last moment where we typed. That is the second time we typed the passphrase. The two most important things in this screen are this line here. Your identification has been saved in, and this is the path of the private key, which is just a file on the hard drive. And your public key has been saved in the exact same name, exact same place, .pub. So this is where our private key is. This is where our public key is. You might want to write those down in our demo now. I'm just going to be copy pasting while I scroll back and forth. All right, so the guide here explains exactly what we just did. We're going to create the key. Key is going to go in a place. It's just a file. It is important to set your passphrase, and there is no recovering this password. So make sure it's secure and that you can remember it. This is where that example from Europe comes in well. Make it something memorable. All right. Depending on your system, there are different ways in which your system manages SSH keys. Remember, there are two aspects to an SSH key. The public part, which is the lock, the private key, which is if you are on a Mac or
So it's okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mitchell, you're breaking up a bit, but it appears you're back, so we'll run with it. We do have a backup plan if things get crackly, so go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right, that's all right. Where did we leave off?
The last thing that I caught was, well, I would say, if you just back up 30 seconds, it would be great.
There we go. So we've generated the keys, the public and the private. The private key, which in the analogy of key and lock is the key, needs to be added to our local system, which is like putting the key on your keychain. This will have to be done every time you open your terminal. So you can read this more in detail. There's a number of great shortcuts you can make, but for now, we're going to be doing this manually. The way we're going to add the key to our local keychain so that our client knows to use this key is by using SSH add, which is the command you use to add an SSH key to your keychain, and tell it to load this file, not the pub file, because that's your public key, the other file, which functions in our analogy as the key to the lock. When you run that SSH add, it's going to ask for the passphrase of that key. And if you input it and everything goes well, it'll say identity added. So this, again, you will have to do every time you open a new terminal. So don't be surprised. Now that we've loaded the key, we have to put the lock, so the public key, on our remote server, which can be done with this command here. So we're going to be copying this. And what we're going to have to change is a couple things. First, we're going to have to add the IP address of our node here, which in our case today is this one. We are going to have to change the username to the one that we're using, which is root. And then we are going to be using this public key. So note we're not copying the private key path here, but the public key path. And running this, it's going to ask us for the password of the remote server because we're making a connection to the remote server, authenticating, and then putting on a new lock. And there we go. And what it tells us here is the number of keys we added is 1. This is correct. And now we should be able to log into the machine without being asked for a password. And there we go. Now, for those of you who think, but wait, not having a password, isn't that incredibly insecure or unsecure? The advantage of an SSH key is that it doubles as a kind of second factor authentication in the sense that without the physical private key file and your password, there's no way to log into your server with an SSH key setup. That said, we still have to disable the possibility of logging in with a username and password. Because otherwise we have just created another avenue to log in, but the old avenue is still there. So in order to do that, we are going to be logging in with an extra terminal just in case. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to open a new terminal screen and make sure I'm logged in 2 places. The reason we do this, as explained here, is in case you mess something up, you make a typo, the keys didn't work, whatever reason. When we change the SSH settings, existing connections stay open. So this is essentially a I made a mistake because I'm tired buffer. So we're going to open a new terminal. I'm going to up the font so it's actually legible. And we're going to be logging in here as well. There we go. Now note, it didn't ask me for a password. My terminal software is still running. The key is still loaded. So that's why it did not ask me for a password while logging in. So we now have 2 places where I'm logged in 2 separate terminals into the same server. All right, so as explained here, we're going to open this file on your remote server, which is the configuration file for the SSH daemon. That's what the SSHD stands for. We're going to be using a command editor called Nano. And Nano is a relatively friendly command line editor. However, keep in mind that a mouse, like clicking, will not work in a command line. So we're going to be doing everything with arrow keys and keyboard. These are the 4 things we're going to do. First, there is a line somewhere that says authorized keys file that has a hash bound in front of it, which means it's commented out. So we're going to scroll down. There we go. So we get to this section here, the authorized key file. We're going to remove that one. This tells the daemon that it needs to pay attention to the authorized keys in the following files. 2, we're going to change the challenge response authentication yes to challenge response authentication to no. Third, we're going to change password authentication yes to password authentication no. Oh, that's what we just did. And I missed the challenge response. There we go. That's already set to no. I believe that is indeed the new default. And the final thing is we're going to change permit root login yes to prohibit password, which is not the same as saying you cannot log in as password, but root can only log in with anything other than a password. And I believe that is on top of the file, actually. There we go. Like that. Now to save a file in Nano in the command line, the first thing you do is press Control-O, which is for write out. In the bottom, it'll tell you we're trying to write to the path of the file we just opened. Just click Enter to continue. If all goes well, it'll say wrote number of lines. And then to exit, you press Control-X.
Can I make a suggestion on that? If you'll open it up for 1 second. And it's nothing about, it's not a change, but these the hash marks at the beginning of a line commented out. And if that hash mark isn't removed, then so essentially, if you'll scroll down to show them an active line, the include line is active, or the challenge response authentication is active because there's no hash. If you did hash that, or if you forgot to remove it, it would invalidate that line. And it's a very easy thing to forget when you're just getting started.
Yeah, so the password authentication there, you're saying if that's hashed, then that's not going to help you any. Exactly.
Yeah, very good. So anything with a hash button in front of it basically means this does nothing. It is nothing more than a comment. Yeah. All right, now that we've had set the new settings to our SSH daemon, we have to restart the SSH server. Now, this is, at this point, you want to have those two terminals open, because if you messed anything up, this is where things might break. So I restart. Now we close this session and try to log back in. There we go. Everything is good. So by now, there should be no way to log in with a password anymore. And we're using exclusively SSH keys. All right, so that's one. I'll give you a moment to take a breath and take a sip of your drink, because that's what I'm going to do.
Do we want to? So let's do a little vote. Do we want to push through, or do we want to deliver the POAP? Mentor, what do you think?
I'll leave that up to you. I
Michael?
will say the next sections are far shorter than this.
So that sounds like a hint that we'd like to push through, and it helps keep the material contained to one segment. So that's great.
I think you just woke everybody up by saying POAP.
I like to drop POAP every few minutes, so people
Right?
who
Do
don't
like, what?
everything we're what? Hey, I'm here.
I have noticed you like to drop a POAP every few minutes. Yes. Oh no! You get the joke. Never mind. All right. So we've now done the most important thing. We're logging in with SSH keys instead of passwords. The next most important is making sure that our machine auto updates itself. You might do this manually. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. But if you're incapacitated for some reason, either good because you're on holiday or bad because you're in the hospital, it's nice that your machine updates itself. So we're going to start with these commands, which actually should be superfluous on Ubuntu because it already has the unintended upgrades packages installed. But in case you're using a different Linux version, this might still be useful to you. And for us, it can't hurt. So I'm literally just going to paste those two things. That should take no more than a couple seconds. There you go. So even if you don't have it installed, you see a bunch of feedback like this. You can read this for fun if you want, but in essence, what it's saying is you already have the unintended upgrades installed, and there's a small update for the update notifier. The second aspect to this, once the auto updates are installed, is to open the auto upgrades configuration file, similar to the SSH file. It already has some defaults in it. And these are some sane auto update settings that you might want to start with. The most important choice that you make in these settings is the following one. So do you want your machine to automatically reboot or not if it is necessary? Generally, I wouldn't worry too much about it. The Rocketpool stack is set up as such that if you reboot, everything restarts automatically. There should be no reason this is a problem. But if for some reason, due to your specific setup, you are uncomfortable with auto reboots, you might want to change that true to false. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove these two lines. I'm using a shortcut Control K, but you could also just go back and press backspace until it's gone. We paste this content, Control O to save, Control X to exit. And then similarly to the SSH daemon, we restart. There we go. And so long as you didn't make a typo in the configuration file, this means you're done. Your machine will now auto upgrade in the background with security patches, which is a very nice thought. That brings us to the second last thing, the firewall. So Ubuntu comes pre-installed with UFW, the uncomplicated firewall, which is a relatively simple way of managing firewall settings. We're going to start by denying all incoming traffic. And then we're going to have a couple of rules to say, unless it's the following types of requests. So step one, and you could just copy paste this, but be sure to read what's there. It says, by default, deny incoming requests. The comment will make the status command easier to read. I'll show you later what that looks like. The first thing we do want to allow is SSH connections to our machine. That is, of course, supremely important. Take note, if for some reason you changed your SSH port, you would have to change this number here. For people who don't know what that means, it definitely doesn't apply to you. Now, this port here is for your ETH1 incoming connection. So if you want to have enough peers, it's very important that peers are able to find you on this port. So we're going to tell our firewall it's okay to listen on the TCP and UDP of 30303.
Can I just make a quick comment here?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't hurt to have that in there as a reference for a human so they know it's open. But the reality is that Docker does not use UFW. So as long as these ports are host mapped and they are in Rocketpool, they will be open anyway, regardless of what's in UFW. It can be useful, though, to have it in UFW just as a reminder of, oh, I have these things open. But it doesn't matter for the machine, it's just for the human.
Yeah, so as an extra note to that, the denying of incoming is still useful for the other programs. And I don't know if Docker at some point will respect the local firewall. I think it's kind of weird that it doesn't, but indeed, this is the case.
I don't think Docker will ever change that.
No, that issue's been on GitHub for like 9 years or something ridiculous.
It's not an issue, it's a design choice they made, right?
I mean,
so you can, I know what you mean by an issue on GitHub, but as far as Docker is concerned, this is just how it works.
That's how it works.
You can place UFW in the path of Docker, and I have instructions for that, but that's really advanced, and I wouldn't do that with a Rocketpool install for a noob. That's just no point, you know.
One thing I'll offer real quick is that
Rocketpool context. This will prevent you from incoming.
Okay, we've got a couple of different ways of installing Rocketpool. There's the native kind of, or there's the Docker way, which is everything is Dockerized and we set it all up for you. Right. That's what York's talking about. The UFW is not really going to help you in that context. There's a second method called the hybrid method, which is where you use Rocketpool to create mini pools and things, but you have existing ETH1 and ETH2 clients, say like you're already solo validating on mainnet, for example. So that might be helpful in that context because your ETH1 and or ETH2 containers are running outside of Docker. And then there's the native setup where you don't use Docker at all and everything is basically just system services, in which case this will be helpful for that too. Right. So depending on how you set up Rocketpool, these particular commands, the allows for 30303 and 9001 may or may not be helpful. But yeah, it's never a good point. Doesn't hurt to have.
So to bring it back, if you're running Rocketpool with like the default Rocketpool install, right, you get in Docker, you're just out of the box, then the sudo UFW allow 22 TCP, or even sudo UFW allow OpenSSH, is all you need. It will by default deny incoming anyway. That's the default in UFW. And then you don't need anything else. Everything else, like the consensus client, the beacon, right, and the execution client, your geth, that's all handled by Docker already automatically under the hood. And then, yeah, if you're doing advanced setup, like Joe said, then this comes in handy.
Yeah. So a summary for people who might get a little bit confused. Pasting all of this is fine, but if you'd want to minimize, the first two are sufficient if you are using the Dockerized setup. All right, so I'm gonna paste these in for our firewall visibility. I will note that for the solo stakers, the geth ports are a slightly wider range from the top of my head from 30303 to 30305. And so take note, if you're a solo staker, you're gonna have to change this. And these ETH2 ports are standardized by the Rocketpool setup, but they differ per ETH2 clients by default. All right, so I paste those two in. Now, if you'd want to see the currently enabled rules, we can say UFW status, and it doesn't allow you to see the rules while inactive. So we're going to enable our firewall. An important one, if you enable your firewall and you did not allow for SSH connections, it will boot you out and you will be unable to get in. All right, so if we run the UFW status here, it'll give you an overview, which looks slightly better on a bigger screen because you won't have the line wrapping. All right, and that's your firewall setup.
If you allow me, I'd like to briefly say something about SSH ports. And so in some instructions, you'll see change your SSH port. I will say that this is not necessary in any way, shape, or form, because we already do key authentication, right? So the changing of the SSH port basically says it's harder to find. That doesn't matter though, because the casual attack will give up when it sees the key auth. It can't brute force you. And the non-casual attack will find you regardless of where the port is.
Yeah. So I believe that changing SSH port is in this guide under the nice to have. Indeed, it doesn't do much aside from make you slightly harder to find. But in a practical sense, I wouldn't worry about it. And that's also why we didn't include it in today's stream. All right, so the final and shortest instruction is enabling fail to ban. Since we are already quite secure with our SSH because we use SSH authentication, this is mostly for a convenience setup. I personally have had the issue that my machine was being scanned so much that my log started filling up. It was mostly annoying. So I like to always install fail to ban, which is a service that will listen to people trying to connect. And if they try to connect more than a certain number of times, they will block that IP or IP range. This is the complete instruction for it. So the first thing we're going to do is by running this here. And that should not take very long. There we go. We will open the SSH config for fail to ban, which will open Nano similarly to what we've done before. And we'll use this configuration to give it instructions, which basically says, yes, you're enabled, use UFW to block potential malicious actors, listen on this SSH port, filter based on the daemon, and people have a max of 5 attempts before we try and lock them out. Control O to save, and Control X to exit. And finally, we restart that service.
And I'm just going to be that guy and say that as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mentor, fail to ban does not act on key auth, only on password auth.
That is a very good question. I am actually unaware of that. That would be kind of cool to know, because that would make it obsolete in this context.
Yeah, I think
So I'll
it can
put
be
that on my
configured
to-research
to see
list.
to see key auth, but I think by default, like with this example here, it does not act on key auth at all, only on password auth. However, still useful because defense in depth, right? So if you're like, well, I know I disabled password auth, but you actually didn't, fail to ban will still kill the brute force attempts.
So this is under no sense harmful, but I will dive into this. If there is extra configuration necessary for the key auth, I'll make sure to open a pull request and make sure that that's updated before
Very
launch.
cool.
Good note. All right, and that actually brings us to the end of what we're going to cover, or what we have covered today. So TLDR, keep your client machine secure, be boring, consider a dedicated client machine, keep everything patched. And yeah, when configuring your node, specifically your Rocketpool node, of course, look at this documentation and make the essential steps. And don't worry too much about the paranoid guide unless you really like to dive into this kind of thing. And with that, I will hand it back to Fizz.
Hey, thank you. So I'm really delighted that of course, you wrote both guides. You wrote it and you explained it. But it's a very succinct walkthrough of the I would say best standard of practice without going overboard. So yeah. So thanks, Mentor. And I think our next act. Well, are there any final questions? We've invited some other folks to join us. Does anyone have any questions, or in YouTube as we wrap this up? So we will continue to keep our eyes open for questions, but for the moment, I'm going to turn it over to Michael for the thing that YouTube has been waiting for a little while.
Yes, everyone's been waiting for the POAP. So to claim today's POAP, you can do one of two things. Those watching the live stream, if you are or have access to your iPhone or like device, you can scan the QR code, which will automatically deposit the today's workshop POAP directly into your wallet. If for some reason that doesn't work, or you are watching via your mobile phone, you can manually claim the POAP by accessing the direct URL, which is at poap.website/secureyournode. That URL is also splashed up on the YouTube stream. You have the next hour and 52 minutes in which to claim. I do want to say, just as a, I mean, I'm not saying anything new here, but Mentor, I really appreciate you had a great ability to distill what can sometimes be, especially for newcomers, very complicated concepts, and it can be very easy to get lost in the minutia of details. So this was, I found it very easy to follow along, and your ability to simplify those things in order for me to logically understand them, I thought was amazing. So thank you very much for one, putting this together and taking the time to make the documentation, but two, also presenting this. This is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, this is great material. What I often do with something like this, if it's just out of my reach or I'm just trying to get used to it, is I will go back and put it on YouTube and play it at 0.75 and just work through the exercises a couple times until it actually makes sense to me. So your presentation is perfect for that kind of deployment. So Michael did share great. Michael did share the claim code, poap.website/secureyournode. And I think it would be great for us to hang around for a few minutes, just to, sometimes questions take a moment to flow in. It takes people a moment to kind of process what they've heard. Michael, we have an internal rumor about an AMA, right?
Yes, we do.
So to get Michael started, EthStaker imagined a few events to help ramp up for the launch. Let me be clear. Michael had the idea to organize a few events to ramp up for the Rocketpool launch. And when I heard him share his idea, I was like, damn, that should have been my idea. No, I'm just kidding. But so this being one, so we've done Rocketpool installers in the past. We've done secure your node today. And you have an idea for an AMA that isn't confirmed, but tell me what idea you have in mind.
Yep. So again, if everything goes well and we may wave our magical EthStaker wand and get what we want here, we are tentatively scheduling a Rocketpool AMA for the 29th of September. It's exactly 1 week prior to launch. This will be a great opportunity, obviously based on the Rocketpool team's schedule, to attend here, but a great opportunity to just ask questions, to sort of zoom out. So the last couple of workshops that we've had with the Rocketpool team have been very technical heavy, setting up your nodes, securing your nodes. This allows us to kind of zoom out and ask, why are we so excited about Rocketpool? What actually makes them different in the range of staking pool services that are out there today? And how do they align with the ethos of Ethereum, being trustless and decentralized, and the like? So this is, again, not an official thing. It has not been penciled in. We are working on it, and we will make sure that if and when it does happen, we announce it on both the Rocketpool Discords and EthStaker. And again, that'll be tentatively planned for September 29th, 1 week before mainnet launch of Rocketpool, which is the 6th of October.
And because we haven't had a great opportunity to coordinate with the Rocketpool team, and it's not fair of us to put something out without giving them an opportunity to weigh in first. What I will say is we're going to hold some kind of Rocketpool philosophy call. And because it is such a big deal to me that we talk about why Rocketpool is different than staking with an exchange, why it's different than the other providers. It's not that I have anything against the other providers. If they are the best standard you can use, then I encourage you to do that. But Rocketpool is in an actual different league, a different category. And rather than me just saying that, I think it's important for us to get together as a community and talk about why that's true, and why it's not just pumping bags or trying to get money, or it's not about any of us as individuals. It's about doing what we think is in the best interest of the beacon chain. And that is giving greater staking access to people with less than 32 Ether. And so, yeah, that is the idea. I don't know what it will look like when we get there, but I think it will be a very interesting opportunity to talk about philosophies behind Rocketpool. So, yeah.
We do have one
questions popped up.
We do have questions.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so
yeah.
let's answer a few of those.
One on YouTube
So
is what are
YouTube?
you suggest? What do you suggest?
So Michael, why don't you read, and Yorick, and I'll let the three experts answer, and I will let Michael read if that's okay. I'm saying let, like I have any control. I'll shut up.
Sure. Let me just make this bigger. Okay, here. What are your suggestions to monitor if your client device has been compromised? Do you constantly scan your network to see if you have new MAC IDs?
Ooh, this is tough. You're talking about indicator of compromise. There's entire industries that specialize in this, and the gear that does that is not cheap. So indicator of compromise is very hard to do. I'm not gonna say do something. Actually, I would go with make sure it doesn't get compromised, you know, and it's really that simple. Be boring. So people gave me a hard time when a few days ago I said, okay, so one of the things you don't do on your crypto machine is porn. And that sounds like, my God, are you square? But no, seriously, because those sites are not trustworthy, and you're going to get ads that try and put malware on your machine, right? So no parenting anything, no interesting things at all. Be as boring and staid as you can on your crypto machine. That's basically it. Indicator of compromise is a thing that exists. as a technology, but it's enterprise level and fracking expensive and needs experts to run. All right.
I will add though that if you want a minor, like if you want to do something, in Dutch we have the word bezigheidstherapie, like you want to do something so it feels good. You had suggested also, Yorick, installing like a malware scanner, at least some low-hanging fruit. If you're on a Mac, there's a piece of software called Little Snitch, which will monitor outgoing connections and notify you of outgoing. But if you're really compromised by something new and interesting, neither are going to do much.
So what I do want to talk about that briefly, right? So some people are like, well, what about antivirus? And the reality is the antivirus vendors are fighting a losing battle. It is trivial to mutate malware and is not trivial to find it. So as a result of which, sure, run your antivirus, right? I have a Malwarebytes, but if it gets to that point, it's already too late. And the reality is that most antivirus things catch maybe 10% of the malware. And the guys that are really proud, they're like, we are awesome, like AMP by Cisco, right? They say we can catch 95% of the malware out there. Think about that. 5 and 100, they don't catch. And that's a great result. That's an industry-leading result, right? Like, if it gets to that point, you're screwed. Don't get to that point. Anyway, moving on.
There was another question here stating, I remember during the beta updating my validator stack independent of Rocketpool when there was an update. Do you think this is still needed in mainnet, or will the Rocketpool stack updates be pushed more frequently?
Joe.
Yeah, I can talk to that. So it depends on the severity of the update. So for example, when we were preparing for the Altair beta, right, we had some time while the clients were kind of doing their thing. And so that was a little bit more of a, yes, Lighthouse has a new version that supports the Altair beta on Prater like 2 weeks ago, and we haven't released an update for it yet or something like that. And that's okay. Because that wasn't considered a high priority update, didn't have any security concerns or additions or bug fixes or anything. It was just sort of a feature update. And then Geth 1.10.8 came out, which had this fix with the EVM, which was considered to be an extremely important update. And I think we pushed that within a day, essentially. So the answer is pretty much any high priority bug fixes, security updates, things that affect your success of the beacon chain, we're going to push that very, very quickly, probably within 24 hours. Anything that's considered a lower priority thing, we probably won't push immediately, and you are welcome to update manually if you want to. We have instructions in the guides on how to do that, but don't consider that you have to unless you want to, that kind of thing.
Okay.
I have loved how easy that manual update process is explained, by the way. Like it's so easy that I can do it. That's a joke. But
Superfizz approved.
I say one quick question that maybe I'd like to cover first in case people are jumping off. Simon asked, do you recommend no password for SSH? If you're referring to the SSH key, that is definitely not what we're saying. We're saying the opposite. Definitely put a password on your SSH key, because otherwise anyone with that SSH file will be able to access your server. Exactly. So I don't know if I read that question right, but that is the question.
And as we covered earlier, passphrase, even better than password.
All right. Michael, do you see questions?
I do see a couple.
Okay, great.
Yeah, if you want to call those out, Yorick, that'd be great, because I'm not seeing it anymore.
Okay. So one question that I think is really good, and thank you for asking it, is when you do this and you disable password login on SSH Secure Shell, can you still log in via password on keyboard and monitor? Thank you for asking that. This is an example of a question where something is not obvious to someone who comes in new, and it's so obvious to people who have been doing it for a while that they're not covering it. That's us. So the answer is yes, you can still log in via username and password on your keyboard and monitor. This only affects remote login specifically through SSH Secure Shell and no other method of login.
One of the best things about running hardware locally in your home or a local data center is you have physical access. And anytime you have physical access to a machine, you can always get in. If you if you make a fatal mistake on a remote machine, then you may end up, well, most of them will have what is analogous to a root shell or a recovery shell. But anytime you have physical access, anytime it's at your home, you can 100% guarantee that you can always access that machine. And so that is one of my favorite things.
That's a really good point as well. That was an earlier question in the trading channel as well. If I have a VPS, how do I get in if I lock myself out, right? Like say I use UFW and I changed my SSH port and I say UFW allow open SSH enable, and I just locked myself out. Now what? And the answer is all these VPS providers have something called a rescue system. So you boot into the rescue system, you fix the mistake, and you boot back into your main Linux and you're up and running. And then the last question was, would it be more secure to set up a VPN on the node and SSH from within the VPN versus logging into SSH from the outside? There's probably different takes on this. Joe says, yes, I like it. I do that. I use WireGuard. Right? I'm going to say, okay, a VPN requires you to authenticate. How are you authenticating? Are you authenticating with a password? Well, now you didn't really improve your security, right? So because I'm just adding a layer of authentication, and the VPN also encrypts, and SSH is already encrypted. So from my perspective, that doesn't really gain you anything.
A small addition.
Okay.
Because not disagreeing at all, but the Rocketpool stack has a Grafana dashboard, which is very beautiful, which allows you to see all sorts of pretty things about your node. So you might want to get into your network so that you don't have to open up Grafana to the world.
I agree 100%, yes.
Yeah, if you are going to do this, you might not even need a VPN, because you can do either a reverse proxy through SSH, or if you're a relatively beginner, there's a command line tool called sshuttle, like SS shuttle, which allows you to open a VPN-like connection over SSH. So if you're not sure how to set up all the VPN things, you're worried that, like York says, you might mess up the authentication, you might just consider securing your SSH and then using sshuttle to
That's
VPN.
a really good point. Thank you. And we can have maybe another little thing where we, not here, but a future 15-20 minute thing where we show people, okay, how do I use SSH to securely get to my Grafana without opening up to internet?
And I would like to always follow this up with the guide that Mentor developed is targeted at everyday users, and it's very easy to follow and step through. But as anyone interested in security knows, the rabbit hole never stops. So when your eyes glaze over and you're hearing words that you don't know, don't panic. That is very okay. If you can follow the basic instructions, you're fine. You don't need to worry about anything else. That doesn't mean that that's the end of the rabbit hole. It just means that that's going to give you a safe and secure system. If you have trouble with those instructions, that's okay too. You can come to the Discord, the Rocketpool Discord, and there are lots of people who would be willing to help you get through it, because we don't want you to give up on those basic instructions. What I'm saying is, when it gets more complex, you don't have to worry about things you don't understand, because those are advanced topics. Is that fair?
100%. Yep, that's fair. And I think it's also fair to say that there's diminishing returns. So even people who do security for a living, they stop at some point. They're like, I can throw another, 40 hours at this, and then I'm 0.0001% more secure. So no, I'm not doing it.
And to add to that, there also gets to be a point where if you don't understand security that you're applying, you have the potential to circumvent things you do understand. So that is really where keep it simple plays in. And that's why we know that all of the instructions offered in the guide, in the installation guide by Mentor, they are their best practice. And that's really what we're looking for everyone to follow. If you have better experience, that's great. But those are really standard best practice.
100%.
Do we want to do a couple more? I see a few more.
What do you see? Can you call them out?
Well, I was looking at the JCRTP one. Oh, no, we just did that. Yeah, I think that we might have covered it.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Great. So
Yeah,
thanks to everyone who come.
there was one more question here that asked on the trading channel. What if it's on a PC that has interesting software on it? You're increasing your risk. That's all it is. You need to know what risk level you're comfortable with, right? Like I am not comfortable with risk. So this is my crypto machine. I bought a separate one just for that because I'm not comfortable with risk. But if you're comfortable with the risk and you're like, no, it's all right. There's interesting software, but I trust it. Fair, you know, everybody needs to make that decision for themselves.
For the trader channel, keep in mind that only take risk when there's a reward. And the risk you're taking is with your 16 or more ETH. And the reward is maybe spending 300 less on a cheap laptop. So we'll leave that up to you, but it's...
The recommendation is as frickin' boring as possible. Like that laptop behind me literally has a Firefox and a Bitwarden on it and MetaMask, and that's it. There's nothing else on there.
Joe, did you have something?
Yeah, let me offer something real quick. So I want to kind of make a clarifying point because I've seen this question come up in the community a few times now. When York says he has a crypto machine, I'm assuming that means he has a machine specifically for interacting with his beacon clients and is like basically his node machine.
Yep.
So I get this question a few times, which is, I already have a mining rig for proof of work for ETH1. Can I just throw my node on top of that? My typical answer is don't do that because again, this is about trusting the software that's running on it. And most of the time you're going to be running some closed source private program written by some other person that you don't know what it does exactly, which is again, that's adding risk onto the stack. So don't turn your mining rig into a node, right?
Agreed.
Make a separate machine for that.
Yep.
And I don't want to delve into politics, but there are extremely good reasons why you would not want, especially beacon chain keys, to be on a computer where a proof of work miner is installed. And that has to do with conflicting interests between the two parties and the type of software they might deploy. So don't do it. Like
that's an interesting level of paranoia, but I'm with you. I think you're right to be that paranoid.
Yeah,
it's
when you say crypto machine, you're referring specifically to like node operation and validation, not just lumping all Ethereum activity into one box. So that's all I wanted to clarify.
Yep.
I would like to thank everybody for their help today. Michael, as always, for going above and beyond to make this go off really smoothly. Mentor, your presentation was awesome. I can tell you, if you go, not just Rocketpool, but if you're looking for trusted security advisors, people that I deeply respect are Yorick, Mentor, and JCRTP. So regardless of, sometimes you ask a question, you're going to get 15 responses and you're vetting through them. Yorick, Mentor, and JCRTP are three people who, in my mind, are the final say. So I tend to trust what they say. So if you see them around, if you see them on Twitter, whatever, they have a very good grasp on these concepts and tend to know what they're talking about.
You will, however, still get 4 different responses from the 3 of us.
And that's okay. But they're not going to be, they're going to still maintain best practice. And that's really what I'm always looking for.
That's right.
So, maybe from different perspectives.
Right.
Thanks everyone for coming out. Thomas, it was great to meet you in person. Everyone else who joined us, I'm glad you made it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for organizing all the logistics. Thank you.
Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.